There's a date on the calendar that most Americans have never heard of, July 1st, 2026. And what happens or does not happen on that date will determine whether this trade war stays a painful headache or becomes a full economic collapse. I'm going to tell you exactly what that date means, what is happening right now in March 2026, and what the next 116 days will look like before we hit it. Let's establish exactly where we stand today, March 9th, 2026. The Supreme Court struck down Trump's tariffs on February 20th. The administration responded within 4 days with a new 10% global tariff under a completely different law. Canada, which had already retaliated with 25% tariffs on American goods the moment the original tariffs hit, kept every single one of them in place. This week, Canada's trade minister flew to Washington for the first face-to-face negotiations since Trump abruptly canceled talks last October, reportedly over a TV ad. Let that sink in. The largest bilateral trading relationship on Earth, $923 billion annually, $2.6 billion crossing the border every single day, was paused because of a television commercial. And while those talks are happening, here's what is simultaneously happening on the ground. General Motors has already told investors to expect $3 to $4 billion in tariff costs in 2026 alone. Canadian households are absorbing an estimated $1,000 to $2,000 in additional annual costs. Steel and aluminum tariffs are adding up to $1,500 to the sticker price of a single American-made car. Canadian tourism to the United States dropped 40% in February compared to last year. And Canada, America's most trusted ally, the country that has bought more from American businesses than the UK, France, China, and Japan combined, is now actively rethinking whether to buy 88 F-35 fighter jets from Lockheed Martin. Canada is redirecting billions in defense contracts away from American suppliers toward domestic ones, projected to create 125,000 Canadian jobs. Jobs that used to go to Americans. This is not a trade spat. This is a structural rupture. And it gets worse. Here is what nobody is talking about loud enough. The USMCA, the trade agreement that governs nearly $2 trillion in annual North American commerce, has a mandatory review deadline of July 1st, 2026. That is 116 days from today. On that date, the US, Canada, and Mexico must all agree to extend it for another 16 years. If even one country refuses, or if talks break down, the agreement doesn't die immediately, but it enters a 10-year annual countdown toward expiration in 2036. Every year after that becomes a renegotiation. Every year becomes uncertainty. Every year, businesses can't plan, supply chains can't invest, and factories don't get built. Eurasia Group. One of the world's most respected geopolitical risk firms has already named this scenario one of the top risks of 2026. They're calling it zombie USMCA. Not fully dead, not alive, just stumbling forward while businesses and governments have no idea what the rules are. And here's the critical thing to understand about why that deadline is so dangerous right now. Trump canceled trade talks with Canada last October. They just restarted 3 days ago. That means two countries that need to finalize one of the most consequential trade agreements in North American history have roughly 16 weeks to go from "we're barely talking again" to "we agree on everything." That has never been done before. There is no precedent for this review. Nobody knows exactly how it works procedurally. And the Trump administration, according to multiple analysts, may not even want a clean deal because the current chaos gives them maximum leverage over both Canada and Mexico simultaneously. Think about what that means. The strategy might be to keep the deal in limbo on purpose. While this is happening, Canada is not sitting still. In 1930, when Smoot-Hawley hit, Canada pivoted toward the British Empire. In 2026, Canada is pivoting toward China. Trump himself threatened Canada with 100% tariffs last year if it finalized a trade deal with Beijing. Canada is pursuing that relationship anyway. Canada is partnering with Australia on a $6 billion radar defense technology program. It is diverting weapons contracts away from American companies. Prime Minister Mark Carney, a former central banker who has managed actual financial crises, has publicly stated that the era of deep economic integration with the United States is over and has called on Canadians to fundamentally reimagine their economy around new partners. Here's the number that makes this geopolitically explosive. Canada supplies 60% of American crude oil imports. It supplies the potash that fertilizes American farms. It is embedded in virtually every American automotive supply chain. When Canada starts systematically building economic off-ramps away from the United States, American consumers pay more for energy, more for food, and more for every car on the lot. And the dollar is already responding. The DXY, the US dollar index, fell 4.2% in the week of March 7th, 2025, when tariffs first hit. That was the steepest single-week decline since the 2008 financial crisis. The market is not confused about what this means. It is pricing in the risk in real time. So here is what to watch between now and July 1st. First, watch the USMCA negotiation timeline. If Canada and the US cannot rebuild enough trust in the next 116 days to reach even a framework agreement, the zombie USMCA scenario becomes the baseline reality for North American trade, not a risk, but the outcome. Second, watch the dollar. A trade war that causes investors to question US economic stability doesn't just hurt stock prices, it raises borrowing costs on $36 trillion in federal debt. The US is already spending over $1 trillion a year just on interest. A weaker dollar and higher rates simultaneously is not a recession signal, it's worse. Third, watch Canadian election politics. Mark Carney is heading into a federal election. Every concession he makes to Washington right now costs him votes at home. That means Canada's negotiating posture gets harder, not softer, the longer this drags on. Fourth, watch small business data on both sides of the border. In every trade war in modern history, small businesses absorb the cost increases that large corporations can offset through supply chain rerouting. The NFIB Small Business Confidence Index in the US and the CFIB tracker in Canada are your early warning system. Here's the bottom line. The last time America was in a trade war this severe, the world had time to adjust slowly. Now, we have a hard deadline, 116 days a deal that may be deliberately left as a zombie, an ally actively decoupling, and a federal balance sheet that cannot absorb a recession the way the New Deal could. The pattern from 1930 didn't announce itself. It eroded quietly, then collapsed all at once. July 1st, 2026 is the date the erosion either stops or accelerates into something that takes a decade to reverse. If this gave you a clearer picture of what is actually at stake beneath the headlines, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because I will be tracking every development in this USMCA negotiation, every data point as it drops, and every signal that tells us which direction this is heading. The clock is running.